Ryan Weeks, Water Jetters contacted me. I've been down there a couple times playing with them, had a lot of fun with them. They asked me to do a knife or object for their subscription box that they do every month. I thought it would be neat to do a hatchet. This fits inside that box, so it's actually a really small hatchet. The steel is 1095, about 3/16 inch thick. We're going to do some carbon fiber handles on them. I'll go through the whole process. Hopefully it'll cover everything you guys need to do to get yourself a functioning hatchet. All right, so we're drilling out the holes. When the hatchet comes to you, the holes are going to be a little smaller than 1/4 inch, so we just need to drill them out with a 1/4 inch bit. I make sure that it's level on my vise. I know my table's level, so your pins will go through much straighter if it's level. So this is a 1/4 inch bit. Drilling the 3 holes out. The hatchet should come to you annealed. I use an F-bit to oversize the holes a little bit to make the pin go through a little easier. If you have an F-bit, it makes life a lot easier. If you don't, you need to sand your pins down so they slide through a little easier, both on the scales and the hatchet. So you can see that's a 1/4 inch piece of steel that slides through nice and easy. I use a heavy magnet just because it gets hot, and I knock, when you drill through it, you'll have little shoulders on the holes. You just got to knock those down. So I'm just knocking them down. You can do that with a file if you don't have a grinder as well. All right, now we need to make the center mark. I made this hatchet, I didn't want to put a spike on it, but if you want to grind it down, you can actually make it a spike. This is just marking the edge so that you can see your center score. I have this scoring tool. If you don't have one of those, whatever thickness your steel is, this is 3/16 inch. You can take a 3/16 bit, lay it down on a table, and scratch the tip along the edge as well to make a center mark. That's kind of the cheap. Can we say redneck?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a redneck, so I can say it. So that's your center line. You can see right down the middle. I flipped it over so that it's centered, even if it's off a little bit. It makes 2 marks. Now we're just rough grinding the edge. You can also do this with a file. Like I said, the hatchet will come to you annealed. It's a lot more work to do it with a file. But you can hook it down, clamp it down on a table and file both edges down. And I'm just trying to make them even. You can go as high as you want. The higher you go, the sharper your hatchet will be, but it'll also take more damage. So most hatchets have a 20-degree angle or more, just because they take a lot of abuse. So I don't go too high up on the sides. Flip it over and do both sides. Gets a little hot, make sure you cool it off. You're not going to ruin the steel if it gets too hot, but just hard to work with. I use that magnet again because it tends to get warm. So I've just got some water there that I can cool it off with. Make sure both sides are the same. You can even grind all the way up into that hole if you want, but I'm just evening it up there. Now we're ready for heat treat. I'm going to use a torch. This is this oxyacetylene torch. I don't use them a lot. You can do it with a MAP gas, but you probably want to use 2 MAP gas torches. It's hard to keep the heat all across the whole blade with small torches. My quenchant's Parks 50, but you can use canola oil. Don't use other oils. Canola has a high flash point, which makes it the best easily accessible oil to quench in. This is 1095 steel, so you just want to get the edge to non-matic. You can see on my quench tank there's that little red magnet there. You can just touch it to make sure it's non-magnetic. See, it's nice red color. I know it's non-magnetic. And quench it. Always have a fire extinguisher ready. People burn down shops quenching. Just bring it to room temperature or oil temperature. I hang mine down in the tank, which you'll see here in a second. Just need to turn the torch off. Just let it cool down there. The hamon is the hardening line. So when steel hardens and transitions into the soft steel, it'll create a line that you can see. You can kind of see it here. That's what I'm looking for. Just make sure we have a nice hamon. The edge is hardened and the rest of it is still soft. And we want to keep the rest of the hatchet soft. All right, now we're going to temper. 375, 400, wherever you want it. That edge is really hard, so it'll have a tendency to chip sometimes. So we just want to soften it up a little bit. So in the oven, 375, anywhere from 375 to 400. Leave it there for an hour, let it cool in the oven, and then I do that twice. Now we're doing the final grind. I'm using the top plate or belt. People say it's dangerous, just be careful. If that belt breaks, it can put that hatchet into your chest, which would suck. Again, just cleaning it up. You don't have to make it all pretty if you don't want to, but in order to see the hamon, it's got to be cleaned up a little bit. There's a gator belt. It's kind of a polishing belt, which I love. Just helps in the hand sanding. You don't have to do as much. Then you're taking that final edge down to about 20 thousandths, or about the thickness of a dime. You can even go a little thinner if you want. And that's where I leave it before I put the final edge. I got a little oopsie right there. I had to clean up a bit. So we're pretty good there. Now we're going to hand sand. I start out with 220 grit sandpaper and just try to remove as many of the scratches as you can. It takes a bit of work. This is what sucks about hamons is hand sanding. Once you do the 220 and you get rid of the scratches, you move up to 320. And if you don't have exactly those numbers, if you're close, is fine. 220 and 400 works as well. I use Windex to just kind of lubricate as I grind. It kind of gets the metal dust and stuff out of the way. Once you've got it done, you're going to put a logo in if you got one. This is a Professionalizer logo etcher machine. Just burns through that stencil with electricity. Do a little more sanding to clean up the logo. I go up to 600 grit after the logo, so that's as high as I go. That's why I call mine the dirty hamons. The real professional knife makers do what are called just regular hamons, and they go up to sometimes 2,000 grit, but I don't go that high. Now we're going to etch the hamon. So I'm using ferric chloride and a little bit of white vinegar to etch it. So just 50 to half, I don't know, 51? No, not 50 to 1. 2 to 1 ferric chloride to water. So half ferric, half water. And then let it sit in a bit. The thing I'm dipping in is the same mixture. It's just a different container. The hatchet wouldn't fit in it. That's super dark. That yours probably, maybe it'll come out like that. Normally mine don't come out like that. But the hamon's under there. So now I'm just rubbing it with the ferric mix to make sure it gets all over the hatchet and in any, crevices that are in there. This is ammonia, just to neutralize the acid. And then wash it off with just regular dish soap. You can see my sink's nice and beautiful from all my etching. This is not my in-home kitchen. Don't do this in your in-home kitchen sink.
your wives or husbands won't like you, or girlfriends or boyfriends. All right, this is 1500 grit silica powder. That might be a little difficult to find. It's on eBay. That's where I find mine. It's just a fine powder that you can kind of rub. I think makeup companies use it. And some oil. I just use 3-in-1 oil and that powder. And it removes all that black oxide. And you're able to see the hamon here in a minute. So you can see that line. It's a little difficult to see. There, you can see it. And that's the blade all polished out.
All right, so we've got our materials. We've got our carbon fiber scales. We've also got our mild steel pin stock. We're going to go ahead and assemble it. So I just take the 2 scales, stack the handle on top of the 2 scales. So it'll be like this, and I just use clamps to hold it in place. So 1 clamp there, make sure that this hump is covered by carbon fiber. We're going to bump it over a touch.
You can use any kind of clamps doing this. These cant clamps are really nice. All right, so now I just clamp the scales in my vise, and I make sure that the tops are squared with the knife jaws, because when we drilled the hatchet, it was square. So this makes it so that your pins go straight through and you don't have to fight assembly. That's what I'm trying to explain there. All right, and we're going to drill these with 1/4-inch bit again down through the carbon fiber. Try to not just power through it, because you'll end up burning your carbon fiber, especially on wood. You'll end up burning, making black lines around your pinholes. That's why I keep lifting up a little bit, just to let it cool off. These are little things I've made. They're aluminum 1/4-inch to hold all the scale material, even with the hatchet, so nothing moves. So you just put it down through all 3 pieces to stop it from moving. You're just going to drill all 3. See that smoke? I'm burning carbon fiber. And the final hole. Now we're going to make sure that we keep everything oriented. You want to sandwich the blade between the materials. If you get them mixed up, the holes aren't going to line up. So just make sure you keep stuff oriented. Use your posts again to hold it in place. And then I have these silver markers that help on black material so that you can see. When you do black marker on it, it's sometimes hard to see. We're just going to trace the outline of the knife. Or hatchet, it's not a knife. And you flip it over. So this is where sometimes I'll mess up, or people will mess up. They mark the wrong side, and then they've got 2 left sides or 2 right sides, which is always a nightmare. So the sides that have the marker on are going to be the insides of the hatchet handles. Those will be up against the steel. I'm doing just 1/8-inch bit indents on the inside, and that's a place for glue to sit. Otherwise, you just end up pressing all the glue out when you squeeze it together. So this just makes it hold on a little tighter. Don't go below the bottom pin or above the top pin, because you don't know where you're going to end up grinding that down. So just stay in between those 2 last pins with these holes. And don't go too close to your outside lines either. You'll do this on both sides. Here's where I would take an F bit and drill through those 1/4-inch holes. That F-bit is just a little bit bigger so that it leaves some fudge room. It also leaves room for epoxy. It makes it so you don't have to hammer pins in. We didn't use an F-bit on these scales, but we did use an F-bit on the hatchet steel itself. Then we're just going to cut along our lines. Don't cut too close to the lines either, or it'll be past your steel. So leave yourself some room. You'll grind that away later. These little bandsaws with the table are awesome. Can't remember the name of the company that makes them, but if you're crafty, you can make one on your own. All right, and I'm just sanding the inside to help with the glue as well. Also knock those points down that the drill bit makes. And it's carbon fiber tends to flake out on both sides, so I'm just knocking some of the stuff off. But the inside's the most important part to get sanded up. Now we got to figure out how we're going to shape the top part of the scale on our hatchet. That line that's there is kind of what I go by. Just to follow that, you can see I drew with a black marker kind of how I wanted it. So we're just going to run right across there. So I made 2 little marks on the scale, and then I'll just draw a line how I want it. And then put the scales together. And then we'll cut along that line just so that they both match up. And then you need to clean that up. Once it's on the hatchet, you're not going to be able to sand it because the steel is going to be in the way. So we'll clean it up before we glue it up. You can use a grinder. I just use this because it's got a belt on it and sitting there. So you can use a flat flatten or whatever you want. You can hand sand it if you want. So I always clean them up hand sanding afterwards anyway to polish them up. Now I'm just going to score the bottom end of the hatchet. On hatchets, I don't like to have the scale material right to the end because when you're throwing them, if that butt end hits the target, it can mess up your scale material. So I like to leave steel exposed on the bottom. So I'll knock that back past the steel. Wear your glasses and your mask, and not just because of COVID. All right, got all the ends cleaned up. Now we're ready to glue the scales on. A little more sanding to help the glue stick. You'll need to, if you didn't use an F-bit, you'll need to sand the pins down a fair amount because they're going to be really tight. Your hole's 0.250 inches and these pins are 0.250. So you'll have a hard time getting them to go in. So this is acetone. I just like to prep all your materials, get all the oils off. Just to help your glue. Two-part epoxy. I do a really sophisticated way of measuring. Half one color, half the other color. And then spread it on the inside scales. I make sure all those little holes are filled with glue. Doesn't hurt to get some down in the pinholes as well. So these are still a little tight, so I need to hammer them down a little bit. Make sure that your scales are on a solid, flat surface when you do this. And if this is a wood scale, you can't do this. It'll split your wood in half. Luckily, we're using carbon fiber, so it's pretty tough. It's not going to split. I wouldn't hammer like this on a wood scale. And as you can see, I don't believe in getting a bigger hammer. It's a cute hammer. Yeah. You see this just slides right on. That's because I did the F-bit on that. So invest in an F-bit if you can. And when I say F-bit, that means the letter F. That's actually the size. A little more hammering. Flip it over so that it's on the flat surface. You don't want to hammer the scales, you want to hammer the pins. All right, so now we clamp it up. I use these little pieces of towel just to protect my clamps so they don't get stuck to the scales or get too much glue on them. You can just put your clamps right on the material if you want. Don't clamp on the pins, clamp on the scales. You want to get those scales flush with your steel. And then clean up this front. You can't get that glue out of there very easy when it's hardened. So I have a little towel, I wipe it out, and then I use acetone to clean it up. And we'll need to do the bottom too, because that's exposed. You won't have to clean up around the edges where the steel's inside the carbon fiber. We'll grind that off later. And I'm just cleaning all Hatchet because you get sticky glue fingers everywhere. All right, let it cure. Overnight's best. Now we've let it cure and we're ready to clean up all the outside edges. So you're just knocking all the carbon fiber handle material off down to this steel. And I'm cleaning the end up here, that's all. I'm not grinding it down. Flattening the sides out. That's the pins grinding down. Use my small wheel to get into the little finger grooves. You can use a round file or one of those half circle files to clean those out if you don't have a small wheel or grinder. You can do all this with files. See, it's melting the glue. All right, once you've got the whole profile outside edge cleaned up, we're going to start contouring. This is a 3-inch wheel, and I'm just contouring at each finger just to add to some comfort. Make it more comfortable. Just don't touch the tip of your hatchet to the wheel. That makes marks. So you want to think of the backside like a Coke bottle. You want the fat part that sits in your palm and then 2 skinny parts at the top and bottom where the meat of your palm sits. Could be a Pepsi bottle, a soda bottle, any bottle. That's a 10-inch wheel, which helps on the backside. You don't have such a tight radius. Now I'm just going to clean up the edges so it's all smooth. So you can see the high points from that Coke bottle shape. We're just going to knock those center points down. We're going to do some hand sanding now to clean up all the edges, and I use tape to protect the finish. That's a rubber pad and then another rubber pad with a wood piece on top of it so that you can clamp it down. So there's 2 rubber pads up against the hatchet. And that's just angle iron sticking out. And that's what I hand sand on. It's just sand cloth you can buy. I split it in half, especially with finger wells, because if it's too wide, all you do is sand the points and not the center. Then we're just rounding stuff up. The pins tend to not sand as fast as the carbon fiber, so they'll start sticking out. Just take a file and keep knocking them down. And then this is that gator belt, just making it so the ends are nice and shiny and not full of scratches. So just cleaning the edges up. Knocking the sharp sides off as well, so it's not sharp. Just making her pretty. Just oiling it up. It's high carbon 1095 steel, so it will rust, which is fine. Just clean it off and oil it. We got to sharpen it. So this is me just putting the final edge on. I just estimate about a 20-degree angle. And you'll see a burr. So once you've got a burr along the entire edge from both sides, see that little burr there on the edge? You want to do that both ways? And then I use the gator to finish, to remove the burr. So this belt just polishes it and kind of knocks that burr off. And then strop it. This is just a leather strop with some diamond paste in it. Comes in a tube, you just rub it on. This is how people show stuff is sharp. And it is. Thanks for watching. Enjoy your hatchets.